It shouldn't be about how much money we spend on education. It should be about what we spend that money on.
The New England Take.
Excited today to be joined by Ian Underwood. He is an author. His books are available at Bare Minimum Books. He's a commentator. He's done a lot of thinking on the world of education and money, and maybe it's not about the money. Imagine that. Line go up does not fix the issue. It's obvious that the results of our current education system do not have results from just dumping more money. Otherwise, many large cities would have the best results when that is definitely not the case. This is the next episode in my Cost of Education series here on the channel. Please be sure to check out those back episodes. They've been really interesting. I originally wasn't sure if this was going to be part of that series, but it definitely fits in with it well. And it's about recentering where we think about education, legislation, and local school boards should be thinking. Maybe it's not about how much money we just keep dumping into a broken system, but think about the results we're getting and whether we're incentivizing things in the correct way. I've been doing this, the Cost of Education series here on the channel, kind of looking at some of the specifics on what's going into the local school level. Where exactly is this money going? I'm only a couple episodes in, but we've talked about school administration, and we've had Christian Cheatham, who's a teacher, on here, which is two fantastic episodes to get a counterpoint back and forth with school administrators versus the teacher's view of the school administrators. Right. But your book is an interesting look at how overall we look at the funding of education. What are the drivers, and what are we ultimately getting out of it? And I want to get this out of the way at the beginning because I have to. So you get two libertarians in a room talking about funding anything, it just becomes a true believer fight. But we're going to avoid that. We're going to play nice in the pool, but all right. But big picture, give the 50,000 view look at what you're accomplishing with this.
What I'm trying to accomplish, I won't accomplish anything if nobody reads it, but what I'm trying to accomplish with all of my books is to get people to look at something where they think they know what's going on and they think they know what the right answer is, and not to say I have the right answer, but to get them to question things that they are just taking for granted, taking for, just for true. And I'll actually, in a bunch of my books and talks, I start with a joke about this guy who goes into the kitchen, sees his wife cut the end off a roast and throw it away. And he's like, honey, why'd you throw away the end of the roast? And she's like, well, that's just how you cook a roast. That's what my mom always did. So they call the mom and ask her the same question. She's like, that's just how you cook a roast. That's what my mom always did. So they call grandma and she's like, well, I used to cut the end off the roast because my roaster was too small. Right. And so this, to me, is, 90% of schools and 70% of politics will just do next year what we did last year because it's what we know how to do. And if we change anything at all, it won't be anything significant. It won't be anything that actually addresses what the problems might be. It will just be, we'll change some numbers. We'll change who we're taking the money from. We'll change who we're going to give it to and how and what schedules. And as I think your other guests have mentioned, that's an easy conversation to have. It's all just spreadsheets and votes. And it has nothing to do with figuring out why you put two kids into an identical learning situation. One of them learns and one of them doesn't. Or you take the same kid and you put him, in one situation, he's doing great. You put him in another situation, he's doing terribly. Those are the questions that you need to be looking at. So that's mostly what I'm trying to do here, though, is specifically get people to stop thinking that the important thing is how much are we spending or what are we spending it on even. I'm saying I now think the most significant thing is when we spend it, okay? And Christian Cheatham, actually, I was startled because he said at one point in your discussion with him, I actually have the quote. He said, this is probably the free market person in me. I think it's much better to be paid on what you've accomplished than on your responsibilities. And I just sat up and went, exactly. That is a one-word summary of what I'm writing, right? And I'm saying that the way I normally introduce it is if you look at all the things around your room, the guitar on your wall, look at the watch on your wrist if you have one, look at the gun in your holster, look at your car, look at your computer. Everything every year gets cheaper and better for the most part. Schools get worse and more expensive. And so you can look at, people will make all these arguments about, well, that's a there are all these differences between schools and everything else. But if you start looking at other institutions like hospitals or, like other where we give people welfare, they're not that different. Here's what's different. What's different is with all the things that get cheaper and better, you get the thing and then you pay for it, right? So you're going to buy something from Amazon or you go over to Home Depot. You get the thing and then you give them the money. And further, if you get the thing and it's defective or it wasn't what you were supposed to get, you get your money back or they fix it, right? And schools work on what I just call that the standard commerce model. That's just what you expect everywhere you go. And the school model I call pay and pray, because what happens is you give them a bunch of money up front and you don't really specify what you're supposed to get for it. If you look at, say, a mission statement for a school, it will say something like, we intend to give a rigorous education with, it's all buzzwords. So you don't really know what that means. And then, so since you didn't know what you're supposed to get, you can't really tell whether you got what you were supposed to. And then if something happens, you're basically SOL. You can't get your money back. You can't sue them, really.
And even worse, you're told to pray harder and put more money into the pot.
Try again next year, and maybe it'll work out better. So that's really what I'm saying is if we were to say whatever it is we do, whatever solutions we feel like pursuing, whether it's fewer kids in classrooms, more adults, more administration, less administration, stricter standards, whatever it is we're doing, my current idea is if we do it under the pay and pray model, it's not going to work. It never has. It's never going to. And for reasons that everybody understands, right? If I pay you to do a job and your performance doesn't depend at all on whether you do the job, then why would you? Or why wouldn't you do the least possible work and have the least possible effect that you can get away with? So I'm just saying, if you do that change, then suddenly that forces a cascade of other changes. And they're not the kind of changes where you have to have a legislature sit down and map out carefully, oh, here's what an adequate education is, or here's how many days kids should be in school. If you're running a school and your job is to say, is really based on this, the more I can get a kid to improve this year, the more money I get, right? The standard would be, okay, if you get a kid to improve 1 year in reading and math in 1 year, we'll give you $5,000 for that kid. Well, if you get him to go 2, you get $10,000, right? And so 3, $15,000. And furthermore, at a certain point, as the kids reach the goal line, they leave, right? Just like a factory, if you find out a way to make a car faster, you don't just go, oh, well, 3 weeks is our schedule for making this car, so let's just let it sit in the parking lot. You get it out of there. Your job is to get things through as efficiently and with as high a quality as you can. And right now, because of pay and pray, all the incentives go in the other direction, right? You make money as a school if you keep kids around for as long as possible. And in some real sense, and this sounds very cynical, but it's hard to argue with, the more you fail, the more money you get. Oh, look how badly we're doing. We need more money, right? So there's a great story I read once. It might be true, it might not. That in the Soviet Union, they were starting to fool around with giving incentives to middle managers. And there were some factories that built cookware for soldiers. And of course, the idea for cookware, if you're a soldier, is it should be as light as possible because you're carrying it around, and it should heat up as fast as possible so you use less fuel. But what they did was they said, we're going to reward the managers based on how many raw materials they use, right? If you use more stuff, if more stuff goes in, then you're doing a better job. And what happened was they started making the cookware heavier. So it actually made things worse for the soldiers, but the managers got rewarded. And there's a little bit of that going on in education right now in schools where, well, if I'm not doing very well, I guess you'd better send more aides, or we'd better have more IEPs, or we'd better have, more federal grants, whatever. The better you do, or the worse you do, the more you get. So it's perverse. And so my idea is that all this is driven by this idea that we give you the money up front and we hope for the best. And if we change that one thing, and so what the book is about is all the different, goes through some of the changes that would have to happen, you know?
Don't we have a bit of a chicken and egg problem, though, when it comes to a certain level of... so outside of just the direct, this is the amount of money we're dumping into the schools, but the children that are being put into the school system, we have this issue where we've got this degradation in society. It seems like a cliche as a right-winger to be saying that, but we do. There's this fundamental change in how families are organized and are preparing children to enter the school system. So what comes first? Like, do we fix this? Do they have to happen simultaneously? Do we fix the incentives of the schools, and the parents hopefully will open their eyes to the issues at hand? Like, this is the one thing that really stood out when I was reading your book as a fundamental issue to break through that awesome barrier. I think we definitely should have a lot more meritocracy when it comes to how much school organizations, whatever they are, get paid. Like the ones that produce the best students quicker obviously should be rewarded for that, because that's fantastic. It's the economics 101 there. But if we're putting in a bunch of students that are already starting further back from where they should be, and the system's broken ultimately entirely, but what's first?
Okay, so that right there is an interesting thing. One of the things I mentioned in the book is if I'm running a school and my job is to get kids through as quickly as possible, the first thing I'm going to do is stop thinking about kids being ahead or behind. If a kid shows up, he is where he is. If he can't recognize the letters, we'll work on that. When he can recognize letters, we'll teach. Now, maybe he doesn't get, maybe the typical kid in the middle of the bell curve shows up and he's at a certain point at age 8. And this kid, because he started, with less when he showed up, maybe he gets there by age 9 or age 10, right? But that's not the job of the school isn't to move kids through in a cohort, right? The job of the school is to take the kid wherever he is and get him to move along, right? And so in that sense, if you start with less, it's going to take you longer. But there's a second companion book to this one, which is called Rethinking Fairness in Education. So the watchword there is, you start when you're ready and you're done when you're done, and we don't consider age. I mean, so one of the things that I would, every once in a while a question comes up, if you could only change one thing, right? Well, now obviously the thing I would change would be, I would get rid of pay and pray and replace it with standard commerce. But if I couldn't do that, the second thing on my list would be, I would make it illegal for anybody in a school to know how old a kid is. Okay? Because then you can't take the shortcut. Oh, you're this old, you must be in 4th grade. That's one of the things that screws everything up. Instead of saying, well, let's find out what you know. Let's find out what you're ready to learn, right? So I wouldn't have kids doing things just because of when they were born. And as I like to point out, I don't know if I did in this book, but I think I did. There's a word that we use for the idea that what you should be doing today depends on what day you were born, right? It's astrology. So if you go to the newspaper and you read your horoscope and it says, oh, today you should ask for a raise at work, you're like, well, that's cute, but that's just entertainment. But if a kid goes, oh, because you were born on this day, today you should be studying the Pythagorean theorem, we just go, oh, I guess the experts know what they're talking about. But if you really think about that for about 5 seconds, you see that's insane. That is a crazy idea. So one of the things that I'm saying is if we move away from pay and pray and go to a model where you actually have to get results, a lot of the problems that you're worried about resolve themselves. Now, because it's going to be essentially a market situation, we don't know ahead of time how they're going to be resolved. I don't know what solutions they're going to come up with, but that's the beauty of a system where people are trying things out. What we do know is if people need to get paid, they'll find a way to do it. So, I don't have answers to all those questions. They are real problems, but I think a lot of the problems come from being stuck in this model, that even the idea that like a kid is in 4th grade because he's this old. And nobody's thought about that. You're just cutting the end of the road stuff. Well, that's how we've always did it. That's how we did. That's how I did it. You
Yeah.
know?
Well, there used to always be these stories, these kids that would be able to fast track, and they'd be 15 and graduating with their high school diploma because they're ahead of
Yeah.
the game, and I feel like that's totally gone now. Like
I think this year there was a kid somewhere who graduated from medical school and he was like 12.
yeah.
Okay, so just imagine holding that guy back till he's 18 before he can even get to college. That's, you're depriving the world of that benefit. You're certainly crushing his spirit. So part of this, everybody's like, oh, we have to treat each kid as an individual. And the first step towards treating him as an individual is, I don't want to know how old you are.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care how old you are. What I care about is, what are you ready to do right now? What should we be putting in front of you, and how should we be getting you interested in it? Right?
Yeah, and that would kind of, in theory, work around one of the biggest issues in anything with run by a bunch of college people that then go into the public field is equity. Equity is right now, because with this model, in theory, kids that probably come from wealthier, more well put together families are going to be able to most likely be able to fast track a lot more kids through the system. Yes. And parents that come from poor families and in the cities and bad situations would take longer, in theory. But the kids that are really smart from those populations would, in theory, be able to jump ahead and not be stuck with their classmates.
Right.
So, yeah, bring the gifted out. I mean, that was a big thing which is weird for me to see now. My kid's is almost in middle school, so we haven't seen what the current high school situation is in our neck of the woods. But I mean, we had different levels. Like there was 1 through 4, 4 being like your honors level, and to the more remedial level, and the students would be whatever was best for them. Some of them I was in honors, some of them I was definitely not in honors. I did not take honors chemistry because that would have been a nightmare. I was a music student. But being able to have that, and so we had this new desire to, once again, based on the age, this cohort has to be together with kids that have tremendous social emotional issues that are unregulated, and the schools are having to catch up, and then kids that don't have these issues are being left behind.
Right. Well, yeah, because the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? I mean, for years I've intended, never got around to making a New Yorker style cartoon where you see a guy showing up for his first day at work and they say, oh, you're over there with the 24-year-olds, because like you would just laugh at that. Yes, you should be around people your own age. It's like, from age 4, that probably stops making so much sense. And it's one of the great things that we see in, this local homeschool community that we're plugged into is, you've got kids from 16 down to 3, and they're all, they're doing what they can do with each other, and they're making most of the fact that they're all together. And so they get a little, every once in a while, you'll get somebody who's been in school for a while and they become homeschooled, and they come in and they're the ones who don't know how to interact with that group, because they're like, well, I should, who are the 5th graders? I should be with the 5th graders. And it's sort of funny. Everybody thinks it's normal, but you think about how damaging that mindset is to any kid growing up who's supposed to go out into society, and you just think, where this is all supposed to be about getting rid of stratification. You should be who you are and you should do what you're good at. And one of the first things we're teaching is no. What you should be doing is based on, you should be with all these kids, for the next 12 years. And again, there were contexts and there were things that were true a while back that may have made a little bit of sense, but they're not really true anymore.
Yeah, and a great example in your book is the Virtual Learning Academy here in New Hampshire, which is mostly, I think it's entirely publicly funded, and it does have that funding model. Can you talk about that briefly?
Right. So they have 2 models. One, they're a charter school, so they are a chartered state school, chartered public school, I think is what that actually means. And there are kids who just enroll as if they were in any other school, and they have one model. But the model I'm talking about has to do with kids who are either being homeschooled or they're in a school that doesn't offer them something and they want to take this. So you show up and you say, I want to take this course. Maybe it's algebra. Maybe it's the oboe. I don't know. You're going to take this course. And ahead of time, here's what you're going to learn. It's not just you're going to be in here for 6 months. and you learn what you learn. It's like, here's what you'll learn. You'll be able to do these and these and these things. And then you take the course, and you have a teacher who is, doing some teaching, doing some oversight. But the thing is, if you just quit or leave or fail sort of the exams along the way, the school doesn't get paid. They get paid literally for what you learn. And in fact, if you were to come into VLAX and just say, look, I already know this material, I just want to get the credit, you could come in, spend 5 minutes in the course, take the final exam, be done, and the school gets paid. So what a great deal that is for them, right? So their incentive is to be looking for ways to get kids done faster.
Innovation, imagine that.
Right, but faster in a way that they've actually learned something, right? So that's the thing. You measure the learning, and you get paid for the learning. And you're essentially taking time out of the equation, which I think is one of the huge problems that we have. I do want to address the question of equity that you brought up, because it's one of the things that just drives me out of my mind is when people talk about equity and they insist on making equity exclusively about money. Okay, so as I said, there's a companion book to this one called Rethinking Fairness in Education. And there, I'm trying to push a different idea. Maybe equity shouldn't be about what gets spent. Maybe equity should be about what gets learned. So there's a theme here, right? I'm actually concerned with the learning and not so much with the money. And so the idea there is, if you essentially create these goalposts, and it's like, look, if you can read at a 10th grade level and you can do enough statistics to understand, a public policy argument where they're trying to convince you to wear 3 or 4 masks or stand, whatever. If you can do those things, then you're done. Because at this point, there's nothing you can't learn. Right? You can read anything. You've got the internet. You got people lined up to teach you. At that point, our job is finished. And if you wanted to do things like take AP courses and learn to weld, one of the other ideas that I've been talking about around the state is you could do those things at a community center. They don't need to be at a school, right? A school in this fairness model is there are certain things that we need everybody to be able to do. And those include reading, doing some basic math, understanding enough rhetoric that it's hard to fool you. We need people to do those. Those are necessary. Those belong in schools. Other things are nice, and those belong in community centers, right? And the purpose of a school, in some sense, is to prepare you to take advantage of the community center or the other job training that's available, right? So, but in that sense, fairness means everybody gets to the same goal line. And if you do that by age 12, okay. If it takes you till age 23, okay, right? But the equity is we want everybody to at least have that same basis. Whereas if we just spend a bunch of money and kids are, how much money are they spending in Chicago or Baltimore, right? And you're running around going like, there are schools there. They're probably spending more than we're spending. And 0% of the kids are at proficiency, 0%. So on the other hand, if you just said, look, that we will actually take those kids along, not advancing them because of their age, we will actually pay attention to what they know and what they could learn next, and we move them through, then in some sense, I don't care how long you're there. And I don't care because even as a libertarian, right, the argument that I make as a libertarian is, it's like, it's okay. In New Hampshire, we have this great, it's in our state constitution. It basically says, look, it's okay. When you enter into society, you surrender some of your rights in order to protect your other rights, right? Not to make things fair or for the common good or whatever. You may have to give up your rights to protect your other rights. So you give up some of your right to privacy to protect your right to property, right? Because if somebody steals your property, you want them to be able to search. If you steal somebody else's property, you should be able to be searched. So I give up a little bit of my right to privacy to protect my much greater right to property. So in terms of schools, one of the greatest dangers to my rights is that stupid people will vote my rights away, right? People who don't know the difference between a million and a billion and a trillion. People who don't understand what a mean and a standard deviation mean. People who don't understand, who can't read a statute and understand what it says. Those are the people, those are actually a danger to me in the same way that, they're a bigger danger to me than COVID ever was.
Yeah, so I love the argument that libertarians just want stupider people in the public. I'm like, you got that backwards, dude.
Yeah. But so in that sense, even as a libertarian, I'm perfectly willing to say, look, if I need to give up some of my property, but what I will get in return is not, oh, here's something to babysit the kids, or here's some strange failed attempt to allow every child to bloom like a flower or have. If what I'm getting is that the kids on their own schedule are coming out of there and they can read and write and think, that's a reasonable compromise for me. Okay, it's yes, this is what it costs for me to keep my rights from being voted away. So that's sort of the way I look at that. But the key there is not how much money gets spent. The key there is that everybody gets to that goal line. And if you're not at the goal line yet, you can quit, because you shouldn't be like treating it like a prison where you have to be there. But if you want to get to that goal line, we will do everything we can to help you, right? But that's the goal. So that's a different way of looking at equity. And again, all the things I'm always trying to say, let's stop talking about money, because I, in one of my books, the Libertarian Case for Education, I think, or for public schools, I have these 3 graphs that I show at talks all the time. One of them is the Cato graph. Have you seen this?
I'm not sure.
Okay, so this is a graph that was put together by Andrew Coulson at Cato, and what it does is it years ago, 2015?
Yeah.
2015, say. And what he did was he graphed on the same graph the increase in spending per student, and that is adjusted for inflation, and it just goes up like this. So over the course of, say, 4 or 5 decades, you triple spending in real dollars. And then he graphs the percentage change in NAEP scores, right? Reading, writing, STEM. And that goes like this. No change. None. I mean, not even a little. Sometimes it goes down, sometimes it go up. And there's a joke my wife and I have, is we call it the NAEP tide, because it goes up a little and everybody, oh, look, it went up. And then it goes down, everybody ignores it, and then it comes back up. But over time, it's just stayed the same for 50 years, right? No change. So, that you look at that and you just go, well, how much does money have to do with it? Nothing, right? And then if you look at the same, you can take the NAEP scores, and when a state will show you NAEP scores, they will show you on a very small part of the y-axis. So it looks like there's a lot of variation, but when you blow it up to the whole 500 scale, there's no variation. But there is a big variation in spending. So it's like you got states over here that are spending $7,000. You got states over here spending $25,000, and they're getting the same results. So again, what does money have to do with it? And we have a graph that I show just for the state of New Hampshire since we had this famous Claremont decision where we started throwing money at schools, and every district now is spending more than any district was spending previously, and it hasn't made any difference at all. So, the first thing I want people to do is stop talking about money. Right. And so this is, I go around and I give talks, and this is essentially, look, if you take home one message, it's that money does not matter. We could spend all the money there is, and if we don't change what we're doing, it's not going to matter. Okay. And so then that's sort of the lead into, well, what should we be doing? Well, one of the things we should be doing is being very clear about what kids need to learn, not what would be fun for them to learn or what the parents want, but what do I, as a taxpayer, need kids to know, right? Which is a very different question from what do I, as a parent, want my kids to learn? What opportunities do I want them to have? What benefits would I like to see them get? Because then you do get into a spending race. But in a sense, I'm saying we need a ceiling, not a floor, right? You need to say, look, everybody needs to get to this point. And beyond that, if you're not getting 100% of your kids to that point, then no, you shouldn't have AP Calculus. You shouldn't have band. You shouldn't have football. You shouldn't have home ec. This is what I need. And if you do want to have those things, move them over to the community center, and do whatever you feel like, right? So, but this is the message I'm trying to get people to stop thinking about money.
All right, that's an awesome place to close. So we're going to stop there. I definitely going to have you back on in the future. My goal is to eventually get to talking about the Claremont decision. I'm going to make the terrible decision of reaching out to Andrew Volinsky because I hate myself or something like that. But I'm trying to show all sides of this crazy story that is the education in this state. Ian, thank you so much for joining me today. BareMinimumBooks.com, and check out all the books he's got in there. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today.
Oh, I appreciate giving me the chance to actually say some of this stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Just to my friends.
Yeah, we'll blow it up. So I'll link down in the episode description if you want to check out the books. We will have you back on after we've had a chance to kind of start to dive into the legal aspects around Claremont. It's not the focus of the series. The series is going to focus on the schools themselves, but this is definitely a key component of that, and it was really interesting conversation. So NewEnglandTake.com if you want to check out more from the show. Please be sure to like and subscribe. Big thank you to the Granite Grok for posting the show weekly. He actually helped make the connection for this interview. Steve McDonald over there. They got great work going on over there, so please go and give them a follow, and we'll talk to you soon.